The sound of a $2,000 bottle of Chateau Margaux shattering against a marble floor is unmistakable. It's the sound of power, of rage. And tonight, at the Gilded Cage in downtown Chicago, it was the sound of Julian Vanzetti losing control. Everyone froze. Politicians, socialites, even the armed security. Everyone except for a young waitress named Clara, who didn't flinch. They say kindness is weakness in the underworld, but they've never seen a weapon quite like silence. This is the story of how a single act of mercy brought the city's most dangerous empire to its knees. The air inside the Gilded Cage always smelled of truffle oil, expensive leather, and fear. It was the premier dining establishment in Chicago's Gold Coast, a place where reservations were handed down in wills and the valet parking lot looked like a luxury car dealership. Tonight, however, the air smelled sharply of red wine and violence. Julian Vanzetti stood in the center of the private dining mezzanine, his chest heaving beneath a bespoke Tom Ford suit that cost more than most of the staff made in a year. At 24, Julian was the heir apparent to the Vanzetti crime family, an organization that the FBI had been trying to dismantle since the days of his grandfather, Old Sal Vanzetti. But looking at him now, he didn't look like a calculated criminal mastermind. He looked like a wounded animal backed into a corner. "I said," Julian roared, his voice cracking slightly. "This isn't what I ordered. Do you people listen? Does anyone in this godforsaken city actually listen?" With a sweep of his hand, he cleared the table. Silverware, crystal stemware, and plates of Wagyu beef crashed onto the imported Italian tile. The restaurant fell into a terrified hush. The general manager, a trembling man named Arthur Pembroke, stepped forward, his hands raised in surrender. "Mr. Vanzetti, please. We can rectify this. Whatever you need, we will—" "Rectify?" Julian laughed, a cold, brittle sound. He kicked a chair, sending it skidding across the floor. "You think you can fix this? My father is downstairs meeting with the Falcone family, deciding if I'm worthy to take over the North Side operations, and you bring me this." He pointed a shaking finger at the ruined steak. "It's overcooked, it's tough, just like everything else in this life." It wasn't about the steak. It never was. Julian was drowning. The pressure of living up to his father, Dominic Vanzetti, a man known as the Iron Pope, was crushing him. Julian was an artist at heart, a man who preferred sketching in charcoal to collecting protection money. But in the Vanzetti family, sensitive sons were liabilities. To survive, Julian had forced himself to become a monster, a caricature of rage to mask his insecurity. "Get out of my face!" Julian screamed, grabbing a heavy crystal decanter. Pembroke flinched, covering his head. But the blow never came. From the shadows of the service station, a figure emerged. She was small, wearing the standard black vest and white shirt of the waitstaff, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her name tag read Clara. She didn't look at the manager. She didn't look at the security guards reaching for their earpieces. She walked straight toward the debris field. She knelt down. The room watched in stunned silence. This waitress, a nobody, was kneeling in front of the Vanzetti heir in the middle of a tantrum. "What are you doing?" Julian hissed, his hand still gripping the decanter. "Did I tell you to clean this up? Leave it. I want them to look at it." Clara didn't answer. She didn't even look up at his furious face. She simply reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a clean white cloth. She wasn't cleaning the floor. She was reaching toward his hand, the one hanging at his side, dripping with red wine and a small trickle of blood where a shard of glass had grazed his knuckle. "Don't touch me," Julian warned, though his voice lacked its previous venom. Clara paused. She looked up then, and for the first time Julian saw her eyes. They were a startling, clear gray, devoid of the fear he saw in everyone else. There was no judgment in them, only a profound, quiet exhaustion. She gently took his hand. The contact was electric, a sudden grounding wire for his chaotic energy. She used the cloth to dab the blood from his knuckle. She did it meticulously, as if she were restoring a painting, ignoring the wine soaking into the knees of her uniform pants. "I can buy this place and burn it down with you inside," Julian threatened, but he didn't pull his hand away. Clara finished cleaning the cut. She stood up, still holding the bloody cloth. She reached for the decanter in his other hand. He tightened his grip instinctively. They stood locked in a silent battle of wills, the raging prince and the silent servant. Then, she did something that stopped his heart. She reached into her other pocket and pulled out a small, foil-wrapped chocolate square, the kind they gave out with the bill. She placed it on the only unbroken part of the table, right next to his hand. She met his eyes one last time, gave a barely perceptible nod, and walked away, disappearing back into the kitchen as silently as she had arrived. Julian stood there, the decanter heavy in his hand. The rage that had been boiling his blood moments ago had evaporated, replaced by a confusion so deep it made him dizzy. He looked at the chocolate. He looked at the managers and the patrons, who were all staring at him, waiting for the explosion to resume. "Clean this up," Julian muttered, dropping the decanter onto a cushioned chair. He picked up the chocolate, pocketed it, and stormed out of the restaurant, leaving a room full of people wondering what kind of ghost had just walked through the fire. Dominic Vanzetti did not like surprises. He sat in his study in the Vanzetti estate in Lake Forest, a sprawling mansion hidden behind 12-foot stone walls and a battalion of armed guards. The room was dark, lit only by the embers of a fireplace and a single desk lamp. "He did what?" Dominic asked, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. Across the desk stood Marco, Julian's personal bodyguard and Dominic's eyes and ears. Marco shifted uncomfortably. He smashed up the mezzanine at the Gilded Cage boss. Over a steak, but he calmed down, didn't hurt anyone. He lacks discipline, Dominic spat, slamming a heavy ledger shut. "The Falcones are watching. The Russians are moving in on the shipping yards. I need a general, Marco, not a spoiled brat who throws plates." Dominic stood up and walked to the window. He was 55, a man built of granite and scars. He had built this empire from the gutters of the South Side, ruthlessly eliminating anyone who stood in his way. He loved his son, but in Dominic's world, love was conditional on competence. "Who stopped him?" Dominic asked. "A waitress boss. Just walked up and cleaned his hand. Didn't say a word." Dominic turned, his eyes narrowing. "A waitress. Did she know who he was?" "Everyone knows who he is. That's why everyone else was hiding." "Find out who she is," Dominic ordered. "If she has influence over him, she's either a threat or an asset. I won't have some gold-digging skirt distracting him when the handover is weeks away." 3 days later, Julian found himself parked across the street from a run-down apartment complex in the Pilsen neighborhood. He was in a nondescript black sedan, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses, a far cry from his tailored suits. He had spent the last 72 hours obsessing over the gray-eyed girl. It wasn't romantic, he told himself. It was curiosity. Why hadn't she feared him? Why hadn't she spoken? He watched as the front door of the building opened. Clara stepped out. She was wearing a thick, worn coat and carrying a heavy backpack. She looked different in the daylight, younger, perhaps 22, but with the posture of someone carrying the weight of the world. He trailed her. She didn't go to the Gilded Cage. She walked 3 blocks to a community center, a brick building with peeling paint. Julian parked and waited. Through the windows, he could see her moving chairs, setting up tables. He saw her interacting with children, laughing, helping them with homework. She looked happy. It was a stark contrast to the stoic statue at the restaurant. He got out of the car. He needed to know. He walked into the community center. The smell of floor wax and old books hit him. Clara was near the back, helping a young boy with a math problem. She looked up as the door chimed, and her smile vanished the moment she saw him. She stood up quickly, putting herself between Julian and the child. The silence returned. "I'm not here to break anything," Julian said, his hands raised. It felt strange to be defensive. Usually, he was the aggressor. Clara stared at him, her gray eyes scanning him for weapons, for malice. She gestured for the boy to go to the other side of the room. "You dropped this," Julian lied, pulling a folded $50 bill from his pocket. "At the restaurant. It fell out of your apron." Clara looked at the money, then back at him. She shook her head. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small notepad and a pen, and scribbled something. She tore the page out and handed it to him. "I didn't drop anything. And I don't want your money. Please leave before you scare the kids." Julian read the note. You can't talk? She shook her head again. She touched her throat and made a cutting motion. Mute. The realization hit Julian hard. That night at the restaurant, her silence hadn't been a power play. It had been her reality. And yet, she had communicated more compassion in 3 minutes than his father had in 20 years. Julian faltered. I just wanted to say thank you. For the hand. You were the only one who didn't look at me like I was a rabid dog. Clara's expression softened slightly. She wrote again. You looked like you were in pain. Broken glass hurts everyone the same, rich or poor. Julian stared at the note. It was poetic, simple, and devastatingly true. Who are you? He asked. Clara, she wrote. Just Clara. Julian, he said, extending his hand. The same one she had cleaned. She hesitated, then took it. Her grip was firm, working class strong. Suddenly, the front door of the center banged open. Julian spun around, his hand instinctively going to the waistband of his jeans where he usually kept a piece, though he was unarmed today. 3 men walked in. They wore leather jackets with a specific insignia on the back, a skull with a serpent through it, the Serpent Kings, a low-level street gang that dealt drugs in this territory. The Vanzetti family allowed them to exist as long as they paid their tithe, but they were bottom feeders. Yo, Clara! The lead thug shouted. He was a wiry man with a neck tattoo. Rent's due on the safe space, sweetheart. Clara stiffened. She stepped forward, her face hard, but Julian saw her hands trembling. The thug noticed Julian. Who's the pretty boy? A donor? Maybe he can pay the protection tax for you. Julian felt that familiar heat rising in his chest. The rage. But this time, it wasn't the chaotic, blind rage of a spoiled child. It was cold. It was focused. Protection tax? Julian asked, his voice dropping an octave. I didn't know the Serpent Kings were authorized to collect in this zip code. The thug laughed. Who the hell are you asking what we're authorized to do? He pulled a switchblade, clicking it open. Clara grabbed Julian's arm, pulling him back, her eyes pleading with him not to engage. But Julian stepped in front of her. You really don't know who I am? Julian asked, stepping closer to the knife. The thug squinted. Recognition dawned slowly, turning his arrogance into pure terror. Wait, you look like God. Put the knife away, Julian said softly, and tell your boss Rico that Julian Vanzetti is personally disappointed in his accounting skills. The thug dropped the knife. It clattered to the floor, echoing just like the decanter had at the restaurant. Mr. Vanzetti, we didn't know you knew her. We're gone. We're gone. The 3 men scrambled out the door, tripping over each other in their haste. Julian turned back to Clara. He expected gratitude. He expected awe. Instead, he found fury. She shoved him. Hard. She grabbed her notepad and wrote furiously, the pen nearly tearing the paper. She shoved the note against his chest. I handle my own problems. Now they know you're involved. You didn't save me. You just put a target on my back. Julian read the note, confused. I just got rid of them. Clara shook her head, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. She pointed to the door, then to herself, then slashed a finger across her neck. They fear you, but they hate you. And now they will think I am yours. In this neighborhood, being a Vanzetti asset gets you killed. She turned her back on him and walked away, leaving Julian standing in the middle of the community center, realizing that for the second time, he had tried to use his power to fix something, and only managed to break it further. The Vanzetti estate was less a home and more a fortress of solitude. Julian sat in the leather wingback chair in his father's study, the smell of expensive cigars and old money hanging heavy in the air. Across the mahogany desk, Dominic Vanzetti was meticulously cutting the tip off a Cuban cohiba. The silence was suffocating, a weapon Dominic wielded as effectively as a gun. The Serpent Kings, Dominic said finally, his voice low and gravelly. He didn't look up. Street trash. Bottom feeders who push fentanyl in neighborhoods we don't even bother to map. He lit the cigar, a cloud of blue smoke rising. And yet my son, the heir to the Chicago throne, is personally engaging with them in a community center in Pilsen. Julian gripped the armrests of his chair. They were threatening a civilian. I handled it. You handled nothing, Dominic snapped, his eyes suddenly locking onto Julian's. "You humiliated a low-level boss in front of his crew. Rico Moretti isn't smart, but he has pride. You kicked a hornet's nest because you wanted to play hero for a mute waitress." Julian froze. "How do you know she's mute?" Dominic slid a manila envelope across the desk. Julian opened it. Inside were photos. Clara walking to work. Clara at the grocery store buying ramen. Clara leaving the community center. And a dossier. Clara Miller. Age 22. Orphaned at 14. Foster care system. No criminal record. Employed at the Gilded Cage for 8 months. Diagnosis: psychogenicophonia. She can speak physically, but trauma silenced her. Psychogenicophonia. Dominic read the words slowly, tasting them. She stopped speaking the day her parents died in a drunk driving accident. A tragedy. But tragedies are common, Julian. Kings do not stop for every peasant with a sad story. "She's not a peasant," Julian said, his voice rising. "She's the only real person I've met in years. She treated me like a human being, not an ATM or a monster." "She treated you like a broken child," Dominic corrected coldly. "And now, because of your impulsiveness, she is a target. Rico Moretti cannot strike you. He knows I would skin him alive. So to regain his respect on the street, he has to strike what you seem to care about." Julian stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "If they touch her—" "Sit down!" Dominic roared. The power in his voice was absolute. Julian sat. "You want to save her? Then stop acting like a boy. You don't save people by punching thugs. You save them by owning the board. If you go back there, you sign her death warrant. Stay away. Let the heat die down." Julian swallowed hard. He knew his father was right about the mechanics of power, but his gut twisted with a sickening feeling of dread. He looked at the photo of Clara, her head down against the wind, looking so small against the gray Chicago skyline. For 3 days, Julian stayed away. He stayed in his penthouse overlooking the Chicago River, drinking scotch he didn't like and staring at the city lights. He tried to convince himself he was protecting her by his absence. But down in Pilsen, the heat wasn't dying down. It was boiling over. Clara felt the eyes on her the moment she left her apartment. A black SUV with tinted windows cruised slowly past her building. When she walked to the bus stop, 2 men in hoodies stood on the corner, watching her, making no effort to hide. At the Gilded Cage, the atmosphere was tense. Arthur Pembroke, the manager, called her into his office before her shift started. "Clara," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Look, you're a good worker. The best. But we've had calls, strange calls, asking about your schedule, asking when you leave." Clara stood stoically, her hands clasped behind her back. She nodded. "I can't have trouble here," Pembroke said, avoiding her eyes. "The Vanzettis. They bring a storm with them. I think it's best if you take a leave of absence. Indefinite." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This job was her lifeline. It paid for the rent, for the supplies at the community center. Without it, she was destitute. She reached for her notepad, but Pembroke held up a hand. "Please, just go. Here's 2 weeks, pay in cash." He shoved an envelope at her. "Go out the back." Clara took the envelope, her fingers trembling. She walked out into the alleyway behind the restaurant, the heavy steel door clicking shut behind her. The alley was dark, smelling of wet cardboard and garbage. She didn't make it 5 steps. "There she is," a voice sneered from the shadows. Clara spun around. 3 men blocked the exit to the street. In the dim light, she recognized the neck tattoo. It was the thug from the community center. And this time, Julian wasn't there. "You cost us a lot of respect, sweetheart," the thug said, stepping forward, a baseball bat tapping rhythmically against his palm. "Mr. Vanzetti made us look like punks. But see, the thing about rich boys is, they get bored. He ain't here now." Clara backed up, her eyes darting for a weapon, an escape route. There was nothing but brick walls and dumpsters. "Grab her," the thug ordered. The other 2 men lunged. Clara fought. She was small, but she was scraped from the rough side of life. She kicked the first man in the shin, a solid connection that made him howl. She scratched the second man's face, drawing blood. But there were 3 of them, and she was one. A heavy hand clamped over her mouth. Another grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. They dragged her toward a waiting van at the mouth of the alley. Clara screamed silently, the sound dying in her throat, a terrifying rasp of air. "Is this it?" she thought. "Is this how I disappear?" Suddenly, the alley was flooded with blinding white light. Tires screeched, a sound so loud it pierced the night. A silver Mercedes G-Wagon roared into the alley, blocking the van. The doors flew open before the car even stopped. It wasn't Julian. It was Marco, the massive bodyguard, and 2 other men in tactical gear. They moved with the precision of special forces. "Drop her!" Marco shouted, leveling a suppressed pistol. The thugs hesitated only for a second. That was enough. Marco fired a warning shot into the brick wall inches from the lead thug's head. The deafening crack echoed like a cannon. The thugs released Clara, scrambling back, hands in the air. "On the ground!" Marco commanded. Clara fell to her knees on the wet pavement, gasping for air, her uniform torn, her hair wild. The back door of the Mercedes opened. Julian stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit tonight. He was wearing a black tactical sweater and jeans, his face pale, his eyes burning with a terrified fury. He ran to her, ignoring the gunman, ignoring the thugs. He dropped to his knees in the grime, just as she had done for him days ago. "Clara," he breathed, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch her. "Are you hurt? Did they hurt you?" Clara looked up at him. She was shaking violently. She saw the fear in his eyes, fear for her. She nodded slowly, then shook her head. "I'm alive." Julian turned to the thugs. The compassion vanished from his face, replaced by the visage of the Iron Pope's son. He walked over to the leader, who was now cowering on the ground. Julian didn't yell. He didn't scream. He leaned down and whispered, "You were warned." He signaled to Marco, "Put them in the van. Take them to the warehouses. I'll deal with them later." "Julian," Marco warned, "your father said—" "I don't care what my father said," Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "They touched her. Put them in the van." He turned back to Clara, extending his hand. "You can't go home. They know where you live. You have to come with me." Clara hesitated. She looked at the luxury car, the guns, the violence. This was the world she had spent her life avoiding. But she looked at the alley exit, the darkness where monsters waited. She took his hand. The ride to the penthouse was silent. Clara sat in the back of the G-Wagon, wrapped in a cashmere blanket Julian had pulled from the trunk. The leather seats were softer than her bed. The city blurred past. The lights of the Loop, the luxury of the Magnificent Mile, worlds she had only ever seen from the service entrance. Julian sat next to her, leaving a respectful distance. He was typing furiously on his phone, issuing orders, cleaning up the mess. They arrived at the Vanzetti Spire, a glass needle piercing the Chicago sky. The private elevator whisked them up to the 60th floor. When the doors opened, Clara stepped into a space larger than her entire apartment building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of the city. The furniture was modern, cold, and expensive. It was beautiful, and it was a prison. "You're safe here," Julian said, closing the elevator doors. "The security system is biometric. No one gets in unless I say so." Clara walked to the window. She pressed her hand against the glass, looking down at the city that looked so peaceful from up here. She felt like an astronaut looking back at Earth. She turned to Julian. She pulled out her notepad, which was crumpled and damp from the alley. "Why?" she wrote. Just one word. Julian poured a glass of water and brought it to her. His hand shook slightly as he handed it to her. "Because I caused this," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "My father was right. I tried to play hero, and I put a target on your back. I can't let you get hurt because of my ego." Clara took the water. She drank, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. She looked at him, really looked at him. He was stripped of his arrogance now. He looked like a boy lost in his father's suit. She sat on the edge of a white sofa. She patted the cushion next to her. Julian sat. Clara took the pen. "You didn't do it for your ego," she wrote. "You did it because you were angry. You are always angry." "Why?" Julian read the note. He looked away, out toward the dark expanse of Lake Michigan. "Because I'm not him," he whispered. "Dominic, the Iron Pope. Everyone expects me to be this ruthless kingpin. But I hate the sound of breaking glass. I hate the smell of fear." He looked at his hands. "I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to build things, not break them." He laughed bitterly. "That night at the restaurant, I wasn't mad at the steak. I was mad because I had just spent 2 hours trying to convince the Falcone family that I was capable of ordering a hit, and I felt like I was drowning." Clara listened. She reached out and touched his arm. Her touch was light, but it anchored him. She wrote again. "Silence is loud. It lets you hear the things people don't say. I saw a man drowning that night. That's why I helped." "Why don't you speak?" Julian asked gently. "My father. His file said it was trauma. The accident." Clara stiffened. She pulled her hand back. She looked down at her lap. It was a question few dared to ask, and none deserved an answer to. But Julian had just saved her life. He had confessed his weakness to her. She picked up the pen. Her hand moved slowly. "When the car crashed, I was trapped in the back seat. My parents were in the front. I called for them. I screamed for them. For hours. Until my voice was gone. No one came. By the time the firefighters found us, I had no voice left. And when I tried to speak later, the words felt like ash. So I decided to keep them inside." She handed him the note. Julian read it, his heart breaking. The horror of it. A 14-year-old girl screaming into the void, until the void screamed back. "I'm so sorry," Julian whispered. Clara shrugged, a small, sad gesture. "It gave me a superpower," she wrote. "I see everything. People don't filter themselves around the mute girl. I know who lies. I know who cheats. I knew you weren't a monster before you knew it yourself." A moment of profound intimacy passed between them. It wasn't sexual. It was two broken souls recognizing the cracks in each other. Julian leaned in, not to kiss her, but just to be closer to that warmth. "I won't let anyone hurt you again," Julian vowed. "I swear it." The elevator chimed. Julian stood up instantly, his body shifting back into combat mode. "I didn't authorize anyone." The doors slid open. Dominic Vanzetti stepped out, flanked by 2 guards. He was wearing a long wool coat, his face a mask of stone. He looked around the penthouse, his eyes landing on Clara sitting on the white sofa. "So," Dominic said, his voice filling the room, "this is the girl who brought down the prince." "Get out, Dad," Julian said, stepping in front of Clara. "She's off limits." Dominic chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He walked into the room, ignoring Julian, and stopped a few feet from Clara. He studied her like a biologist studying a rare insect. "You have spirit," Dominic said to her. "I'll give you that. Fighting off 3 of Moretti's men? Impressive." Clara stood up. She didn't cower. She met the Iron Pope's gaze with her clear gray eyes. "She's staying here," Julian declared. "Moretti put a hit on her. She's under my protection." Dominic turned to his son. "Is she? And who protects you, Julian? You brought a civilian into the safe house. You used family resources, my resources, to wage a private war against a partner organization. Rico Moretti is calling for blood. He says you violated the truce." "I don't care about the truce." "I do," Dominic roared. "Business is business. You don't burn down a partnership over a skirt." Dominic took a deep breath, smoothing his coat. "However, the damage is done. If we hand her over now, we look weak. The Vanzetti family does not yield." He turned back to Clara. "You are a problem, Miss Miller, but you are also an opportunity." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He tossed it onto the coffee table. "There is a gala tomorrow night, the mayor's charity ball. Every major player in the city will be there, the Falcones, the Russians, the politicians, and the Vanzettis." Dominic smiled, a shark baring its teeth. If you are to be under our protection, you must earn your keep. You will attend the gala with Julian. You will be his date. You will be seen. And you will be silent." "Why?" Julian asked, suspicious. "Because," Dominic said, walking back to the elevator, "rumors are spreading that Julian Vanzetti is weak, that he is controlled by his emotions. If he walks in with the woman he saved, looking like a king with his queen, it changes the narrative. It makes this look like a calculated move, not a tantrum. It makes you look powerful." Dominic pressed the button. As the doors began to close, he looked at Clara one last time. "Where the diamonds in the box? And, Clara, don't disappoint me. In this world, liabilities are liquidated." The doors closed. Julian and Clara were left alone in the silence, the velvet box sitting on the table like a bomb waiting to detonate. The preparation for the mayor's charity ball was not a makeover. It was an armoring. At 4 p.m., a team of 3 women arrived at the penthouse. They were led by Serafina, a woman with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been chiseled from ice. They didn't ask Clara what she wanted to wear. In the Vanzetti world, you didn't choose your uniform. The mission dictated it. "Stand still," Serafina commanded, her mouth full of pins. Clara stood on a pedestal in the center of the dressing room, a space larger than the kitchen at the Gilded Cage. She felt like a doll being assembled. They scrubbed the smell of the restaurant and the alley from her skin with rose-scented exfoliants. They painted her nails a deep, blood-red burgundy. They pulled her hair back into an intricate, architectural chignon that exposed the long, elegant line of her neck. Then came the dress. It was a custom-made gown of midnight blue silk velvet, strapless, with a slit that ran dangerously high up her left leg. It was beautiful, but it was heavy. As Serafina zipped it up, Clara felt the weight of it, the weight of expectations. Julian waited in the living room. He was pacing, adjusting the cuffs of his tuxedo for the 10th time. He looked like the prince of the city, handsome and sharp, but his eyes were darting toward the hallway every few seconds. He hated this. He hated using her as a prop. When Clara stepped out, the pacing stopped. Julian didn't say anything. He couldn't. The girl in the worn waitressing uniform, the girl in the oversized coat, was gone. Standing there was a woman who looked like she could command armies with a glance. The dark blue of the dress made her pale skin glow like moonlight, and her gray eyes, framed by smoky makeup, looked piercing, dangerous. "Clara!" Julian breathed. Serafina cleared her throat. "The accessory, Mr. Vanzetti." Julian snapped out of his trance. He walked over to the velvet box his father had left. He opened it. Inside lay the Vanzetti tear, a pear-shaped diamond necklace that was rumored to have been stolen from a Russian archduke in the 1920s. It was worth more than the entire block Clara lived on. "This is," Julian hesitated. "This is heavy. You don't have to wear it." Clara stepped closer to him. She turned around, lifting her hair, exposing her neck. It was an instruction. Julian's fingers trembled as he fastened the clasp. The cold metal touched her warm skin, and a shiver ran through her. He leaned in close to her ear. "You look terrifying," he whispered. "In a good way, like a queen." Clara turned and looked at him. She offered him a small, rare smile, one that didn't reach her eyes, but touched her lips. She took his arm. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, underscored by the nervous energy of Chicago's elite. When the doors opened and the announcer declared, "Mr. Julian Vanzetti and guest," the room didn't just go quiet. It froze. They walked down the grand staircase. Julian kept his head high, his face a mask of bored indifference, the perfect Mafia scion. But his grip on Clara's arm was tight. "Don't look at the floor," he murmured, barely moving his lips. "Look at them. Make them look away first." Clara obeyed. She scanned the crowd. She saw the politicians who took Vanzetti money. She saw the socialites who whispered behind their hands. And then she saw them. In the center of the room, holding court near the champagne fountain, was Dominic Vanzetti. Standing next to him was a man Clara recognized from the news, Salvatore Falcone, the head of the rival crime family. And behind Falcone, smirking with a glass of scotch in his hand, was Rico Moretti. Rico looked different in a tuxedo, but the snake-like malice in his eyes was the same. When he saw Clara, his smirk faltered. He whispered something to Falcone. Dominic watched them approach. His expression was unreadable, but as Julian and Clara reached the bottom of the stairs, Dominic gave a barely perceptible nod. "Father," Julian said, his voice steady. "Mr. Falcone." "Julian," Falcone said, his voice like grinding stones. He was a massive man, older than Dominic, with eyes that looked dead. "And who is this lovely creature? I didn't know you had permanent company." "This is Clara," Julian said, "and she's not company, she's with me." Falcone turned his dead eyes to Clara. "A pleasure, my dear. You're very quiet, a rare quality in a woman." The men around him chuckled sycophantically. Rico stepped forward, emboldened by his boss's presence. "Maybe she's shy," Rico sneered. "Or maybe she knows that in this room, the help should be seen and not heard. I swear I've seen her waiting tables somewhere, the Gilded Cage, perhaps." The insult hung in the air. This was the test. If Julian exploded, if he caused a scene, he lost. If he did nothing, he looked weak. Clara felt Julian's muscles coil. He was about to strike. She squeezed his arm. "Stop." She let go of Julian. The circle of men widened, watching. Clara took a step toward Rico. She stood toe-to-toe with the thug who had tried to kidnap her in the alley. She was inches from him. She could smell the cheap cologne masking the scent of tobacco. She looked him up and down, her gray eyes dissecting him. She looked at his shoes, scuffed, his tie crooked, and his hands shaking slightly. Then she looked at Falcone, then back at Rico. She tilted her head, a look of profound, pitying confusion on her face. She reached out and, with 2 fingers, straightened Rico's bow tie. She patted his cheek, gently, patronizingly, the way one would pat a child who had soiled themselves. Then she turned her back on him and returned to Julian's side. The silence stretched for a second, and then Julian laughed. It was a genuine, relaxed laugh. "She has a sharp eye for detail, Rico," Julian said. "She fixed you. You should thank her." A ripple of amusement went through the crowd. Even Falcone cracked a smile. Clara hadn't spoken a word, but she had emasculated Rico completely. She had treated him not as a threat, but as a project. Rico's face turned purple. He opened his mouth to speak, but Falcone raised a hand. "Enough," Falcone said. "The lady has style. Come, Dominic, let's discuss the zoning permits." The tension broke. The music swelled. Julian led Clara onto the dance floor. "That," Julian whispered as he pulled her close for a waltz, "was the most gangster thing I have ever seen." Clara rested her head against his shoulder. Her heart was pounding like a jackhammer, but she let herself breathe. For a moment, in the arms of the boy who hated broken glass, she felt safe. But safety in the Vanzetti world was an illusion. The gala wore on. It was a masquerade of civility masking a war zone. Waiters circulated with trays of caviar and crystal flutes of Dom Perignon. Deals were being cut in corners. Territories were being renegotiated over hors d'oeuvre. Clara remained at Julian's side, her silence acting as a shield. People projected their own thoughts onto her. Men thought she was mysterious. Women thought she was snobbish. She absorbed it all. But while everyone else was watching the people, Clara was watching the mechanics. Her time at the Gilded Cage had taught her the rhythm of service. She knew how waiters moved, efficient, invisible, fluid. She noticed a waiter near the VIP section where Dominic and Falcone were seated. He was young, nervous. He kept touching his ear, as if adjusting an earpiece, but the staff here didn't wear earpieces. He was carrying a tray with a single distinct bottle of vintage red wine, a 1982 Petrus. Falcone had ordered it. a peace offering to Dominic. Clara watched the waiter pour. His hand didn't shake, but his eyes were fixed on Dominic's glass. He poured Falcone's glass first, then Dominic's. But Clara saw the slight sleight of hand, a twist of the wrist. A small, clear capsule dropped from the waiter's sleeve into Dominic's glass just as the wine hit the crystal. It dissolved instantly. It was seamless, a magician's trick. No one saw it. Julian was busy talking to a city councilman. The security guards were scanning the perimeter, looking for guns, not chemistry. Dominic raised the glass. "To the truce," he said, looking at Falcone. Falcone raised his glass. "To the truce." Clara didn't think. She didn't calculate. The instinct that had made her grab the chocolate for Julian kicked in. She broke away from Julian. "Clara?" Julian called out, surprised. She moved fast, the velvet dress flowing around her like smoke. She reached the VIP table just as the glass touched Dominic's lips. She didn't scream. She couldn't. She slammed her hand onto the table, shattering the calm. Dominic froze, the glass inches from his mouth. He looked up, annoyed. "What is the meaning of—" Clara grabbed the glass from his hand. The table gasped. To snatch a drink from the Iron Pope was suicide. Dominic stood up, his face darkening with rage. "You insolent!" Clara didn't look at him. She looked at the waiter. The waiter's eyes went wide with panic. He took a step back. Clara held the glass up to the light. Then she turned and offered it to the waiter. She thrust the glass toward his chest. "Drink it." The room went deathly silent. The orchestra stopped playing. Everyone was watching the mute girl challenging the server. The waiter stammered. "I'm on duty, miss. I can't." Clara took a step forward. She shoved the glass closer to his face. Her eyes were blazing. "Drink it." "What is going on here?" Falcone demanded, standing up. Julian was at Clara's side now, his hand on her waist, confused but ready to defend her. "Clara, what are you doing?" Clara ignored him. She pointed a finger at the waiter, then at the glass, then mimed a choking motion. Dominic looked at the waiter. He saw the sweat beading on the young man's forehead. He saw the terror. Dominic Vanzetti was many things, but he was not stupid. "Drink the wine," Dominic said softly. His voice carried across the silent ballroom. "Sir, The waiter backed away. "If it's just wine," Dominic said, pulling a gun from his tuxedo jacket, a move that caused screams in the crowd, "then you have nothing to worry about. Drink." The waiter looked at the gun. He looked at the glass. He dropped the tray. "It was Moretti," the waiter screamed, pointing a trembling finger across the room. "Rico made me do it. He said it was just a laxative. He said it would just embarrass you." Chaos erupted. Rico Moretti, who had been watching from the bar, turned to run. But the doors were already blocked by Vanzetti security. Dominic didn't look at the fleeing rat. He looked at the glass in Clara's hand. He looked at the wine that would have stopped his heart in seconds. He took the glass from her gently. He set it down on the table. For the first time in his life, Dominic Vanzetti looked at Clara Miller with something other than contempt. He looked at her with fear and respect. "You saw that?" Dominic asked quietly. "From across the room?" Clara nodded. "Why?" Dominic asked. "I treated you like a pawn. Why save me?" Clara pulled out her notepad. She scribbled quickly, her hand steady, despite the adrenaline crashing through her system. "Because Julian loves you. And I don't want to see him break again." She showed the note to Dominic. The Iron Pope read the words. He looked at his son, who was standing protectively beside this small, silent force of nature. He saw the way Julian looked at her, not with possession, but with awe. Dominic folded the note and put it in his pocket. He turned to the room, to the Falcones, to the stunned guests. "The party is over," Dominic announced. "Salvatore, take your dog Moretti and get out of my city. The truce is dead." "Dominic," Falcone pleaded, "I didn't know." "Get out!" Dominic roared. As the room cleared, security swarming everywhere. Julian turned to Clara. He grabbed her face in his hands. "You saved him," Julian said. his voice shaking. "You saved all of us." Clara looked at him. She was exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her trembling. Julian pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her neck. "I want to hear your voice," he whispered. "I know you can't. But God, I wish I could hear you say my name." Clara closed her eyes. She felt the vibration of his chest against hers. She felt the safety of his arms. The trauma of the accident, the years of silence, the wall she had built, it was strong, but the love of this broken prince was a hammer. She opened her mouth. Her throat felt dry, rusty, unused for 8 years. She pushed air through her vocal cords. It hurt. It felt like tearing sandpaper. Julian pulled back. He stared at her, his eyes wide. Julie-Anne. It was a whisper, a crackling, broken whisper, but it was there. Julian started to cry. He didn't care who saw. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her eyelids. "Loud and clear," he sobbed. "Loud and clear." But the night wasn't over. As the ballroom emptied, a slow clap echoed from the balcony. They looked up. Standing on the mezzanine, looking down at the chaos, was a figure in a white suit. He wasn't part of the Falcone crew. He wasn't Vanzetti. It was the FBI special agent in charge, Thomas Reynolds. And he was smiling. "Beautiful show," Reynolds called down. "Attempted murder. Brandishing a firearm. Conspiracy. I think we finally have enough for a RICO case, Dominic. And the best part? We have a witness." Reynolds pointed a finger directly at Clara. "Miss Miller, you're coming with us." The ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton transformed into a standoff. FBI agents swarmed the stairs, their blue windbreakers clashing with the elegant evening wear of the frozen guests. Agent Thomas Reynolds descended like a vulture, stopping mere feet from Dominic Vanzetti. "Checkmate, Dominic!" Reynolds smirked, gesturing to his marshals. "Miss Miller is coming with us. She's a material witness to an attempted assassination. Under RICO, we're taking her into protective custody immediately. She's the thread that finally unravels your family." Reynolds turned to Clara, his smile predatory. "Don't worry, honey. We'll put you in a safe house. You'll never have to see these animals again." Clara stiffened, feeling Julian's arm tighten protectively around her. She knew what federal custody meant. Endless interrogations and being used as a pawn. Dominic Vanzetti stepped forward, the gun he had brandished moments ago nowhere to be seen. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking bored. "You have a problem, Agent Reynolds." "I have the crime, the weapon, and the witness." Reynolds shot back. "You have a mute girl with a documented history of severe psychological trauma." Dominic countered smoothly. "A girl who, under extreme duress, might have hallucinated. A defense attorney will tear your witness apart before you even reach a grand jury." "She's not disabled," Reynolds argued, his face reddening. "She spoke. We all heard it." Dominic raised an eyebrow and turned to the crowd of terrified elites. "Did anyone hear Miss Miller speak?" The room fell deadly silent. The mayor, eyeing the Vanzetti patriarch, cleared his throat. "I didn't hear a word, Agent. The poor girl was silent all night." "Neither did I," a councilman added quickly. Dominic turned back to Reynolds with a shark-like grin. "See? No reliable witness. Just a scared girl who needs to go home." Reynolds stepped into Dominic's space, furious. "I can arrest her for obstruction. I can arrest all of you." "On what grounds?" Julian interjected, stepping in front of Clara. His voice was sharp, authoritative. "She saved a man's life. If you arrest a hero, Reynolds, I'll have every news station in Chicago on your lawn by sunrise. You'll be the agent who bullied a disabled orphan." Reynolds looked between the three of them, the Iron Pope, the Prince, and the Silent Queen. He realized the board had shifted. He had the badge, but they owned the city. "This isn't over," Reynolds spat, signaling his men to retreat. "One day, you'll slip." "Get out," Julian ordered. As the agents retreated, the tension in the room snapped. Dominic let out a long breath and looked at his son. For the first time, there was no disappointment in his eyes, only respect. "You handled that well," Dominic said quietly. He turned to Clara. You are inconvenient, Miss Miller. But you are loyal. In this family, loyalty is the only currency that matters. He checked his watch. Go home. I have a war to plan. 6 months later, the shattered glass of the gilded cage was a distant memory. But Julian wasn't there. He stood in a sun-drenched loft in the West Loop, leaning over a drafting table covered in blueprints. He wasn't designing a casino or a fortress. He was sketching the Miller Community Center for the Arts. He had made a deal with his father. Dominic kept the streets, and Julian ran the legitimate construction empire. He had traded the gun for the drafting pencil. The front door opened. Clara walked in, wearing a simple cream sweater, carrying groceries. She looked healthier, lighter. "Hey," Julian said, looking up with a smudge of charcoal on his cheek. "Hey," Clara replied. Her voice was soft and raspy, like velvet dragged over gravel. She didn't speak often, only to him. But the silence was no longer a prison. She walked over to the table, tracing the lines of his drawing. "The atrium," she rasped. "Needs more light." "Everyone's a critic," Julian laughed, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "How was therapy?" "Good," she smiled, leaning back into him. "I shouted at a taxi driver today." "That's my girl," Julian kissed her neck, "terrorizing Chicago." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, foil-wrapped chocolate square, the same kind she had given him the night they met. He unwrapped it and popped it into her mouth. "You talk too much, Vanzetti," she whispered playfully. Julian pulled her close, the city noise fading into the background. "And you don't have to say a word, Clara. I hear you loud and clear." The Mafia prince had found his ruin, and in the wreckage he had found his soul. That is the story of Julian and Clara, a reminder that even in the darkest worlds, kindness is the most dangerous weapon of all. We saw Julian, a man born into violence, brought to his knees not by a gun, but by a simple piece of chocolate and a silent gesture of empathy. Clara showed us that power isn't about how loud you can scream, but about the strength to remain human when everyone else has become a monster. If Julian and Clara's journey touched you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Do you think Julian made the right choice leaving the Mafia life? Let me know in the comments. And for more dramatic stories about forbidden love and instant karma, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell. See you in the next story.